All right, today we're putting on our detective hats. Our mission? To decode one of the most common, yet, let's be honest, often confusing parts of any medical report, the liver function tests, or LFTs.
Seriously, have you ever gotten that piece of paper back and just stared at it? It's like this wall of acronyms and numbers, ALT, AST, ALP. And it feels completely overwhelming, right? Like you've been handed some kind of cryptic message with absolutely no key.
Well, here's the thing. That's pretty much what they are, clues. And today, we are going to become medical detectives. We're going to learn how to read these little signals your liver is sending out, piece by piece, so we can finally understand the story it's trying to tell us. Okay, so any good investigation has to start with gathering the evidence. So first things first, we need to meet our key players, the individual tests that make up this panel. Let's figure out what each one brings to the table.
First up is ALT. Now, you should think of ALT as our most reliable informant for liver cell damage. It's an enzyme that pretty much just hangs out inside your main liver cells, which are called hepatocytes. So if these cells get injured for any reason, ALT starts to leak out into your bloodstream. A high ALT, that is a very, very specific tip-off that something is directly hurting those liver cells.
Next, we've got AST. Think of AST as ALT's partner. It also signals cell damage, but there's a catch. AST isn't quite so specific. You see, it's found in the liver, sure, but it's also in your heart and muscles. So if AST is high, our detective needs to look right over at its partner, ALT, to confirm that the trouble is actually coming from the liver. It's a super important piece of evidence, but it always needs a witness.
All right, let's move on to our next clue, ALP. This one's a little different. It doesn't tell us so much about the main liver cells, but it tells us a ton about the liver's drainage system, the bile ducts. You can think of ALP as our plumbing inspector. If ALP levels are high, it's a huge clue that there might be a blockage somewhere. That's a condition called cholestasis, where bile just can't flow the way it's supposed to. So this brings us to a classic detective problem. We know ALP is also found in our bones. So if it's high, how do we know for sure the liver is the real source? Well, that's where GGT comes in. GGT is our expert witness. If ALP is high and GGT is high, our detective can be almost certain the problem is coming from the liver. Okay, let's talk about bilirubin. I like to think of this as the liver's report card on waste management. Bilirubin is this yellow stuff that's made when old red blood cells are broken down, and it's the liver's job to process it and get it out of the body. So if your bilirubin levels are high, it's a big sign that the liver's waste disposal system is either totally overwhelmed or blocked up. It's the clue that tells us things are backing up.
And finally, we have the tests that check on the liver's factory output. Because the liver isn't just a filter, it's a manufacturing plant that makes really crucial proteins. Albumin tells us about the factory's long-term production, so a low level might suggest a more chronic, ongoing problem. PT/INR, on the other hand, measures clotting factors, which have a really short lifespan. That makes it a super sensitive indicator of a sudden, acute problem with the liver's ability to manufacture things.
All right, we've met the players, we've gathered our evidence, but any good detective knows that individual clues rarely solve the case. The real breakthrough, that comes from finding the pattern. So let's see how all these clues start to fit together.
And this is so important. Looking at a high ALT all by itself doesn't give you the full story, not even close. The real secret to cracking this code is to look for the pattern across all of these tests. Are the cell injury markers going up? Or is it the bile duct markers? Or is it both? So this table breaks down the three main patterns our detective is always looking for. Look at that first row, the hepatocellular pattern. See how the cell injury markers AST and ALT are way up? But the ALP is pretty much normal? This points the finger directly at damage to the liver cells themselves. Now look at the second row, the cholestatic pattern. The tables have totally turned. Now ALP, our plumbing inspector, is the one that's shooting up. This basically screams plumbing problem, like a blockage. And finally, you've got the mixed pattern, where both sets of clues are elevated, telling our detective that there's a problem causing both cell injury and a blockage in the plumbing.
So, now that we've got the basic patterns down, we can get into some next-level detective work. Because sometimes the relationship between two clues, a specific ratio, can give us an incredibly powerful lead on what the actual culprit is.
This one is a classic, the AST to ALT ratio. In most kinds of liver damage, ALT is actually higher than AST. But there's this one specific scenario where that flips, and it flips dramatically. If AST is more than twice as high as ALT, that is a very, very strong clue that points toward alcoholic liver disease. And that's because alcohol causes a specific kind of injury that makes the liver release a lot more AST.
And let's just circle back to our ALP and GGT partnership, because it's the perfect example of this kind of advanced work. You've got a high ALP. Is it a liver plumbing problem, or is it a red herring coming from the bones? You check your other informant, GGT. If GGT is also high, case confirmed. It's hepatic. The liver is the scene of the crime. But if GGT is normal, you can confidently rule out the liver and start looking elsewhere. Maybe it's something like bone disease.
So, we've looked at the clues, we've identified the patterns, we've even cracked some of the advanced ratios. What's the final verdict here? What is the most important takeaway from this entire investigation? Well, it really all boils down to these key principles. First, context is everything. These numbers are pretty much meaningless without knowing the patient's story. Second, patterns and trends over time are so much more valuable than one single result. We're always looking at three things: injury, blockage, and function. Those special ratios can give us really powerful shortcuts. And maybe most critically, you have to remember that these tests are just one part of the bigger clinical picture. They are crucial clues, but they are not the final answer.
And this is where it all leads. The clues on the lab report guide the next steps. So, for instance, if the pattern points to that cholestatic or plumbing problem we talked about, as this guideline from NICE shows, the very next step is almost always an ultrasound to actually get a picture of what's going on with those bile ducts. The lab clues lead directly to the next phase of the investigation.
So, after all this, let's go all the way back to that confusing lab report. Is it just a meaningless list of acronyms and numbers? Or, if you have the right decoder ring, is it actually a really rich story about one of your body's most amazing organs, just waiting for a detective like you to come along and read it?